And the stories of the Bible are often used as weapons. Thinking about what Juanita said yesterday, white folk especially need to talk about this. Because our history, in ways that very few of us are very conscious of, our history is the story about how the stories of the Bible have been used in extremely destructive ways. The story of the Jews, or the children of Israel, leaving Egypt and going into Canaan became the primary narrative, a primary narrative that framed the founders of this country and their encounter with the native peoples. The result was destructive. And if you speak to many native peoples today, they will tell you we are not anywhere close to dealing with the aftermath of that story. The same thing happened in Africa. King Leopold lived by that story, was part of a whole European empire that lived by that story and justified a Holocaust that very few people know about, how in a period of something like 20 years, 6 million Congolese people were killed. The estimates are between 10 and 20 million Nigerians were killed. The impact of colonialism that was fueled by an understanding of the Bible is far-reaching. I know I look pretty old. I'm 57. I know I don't look a day over 67, but I'm not that old, okay? And when I was a boy in Sunday school, white church, I remember my Sunday school teacher teaching us from Genesis chapter 9, the curse, then they called it the curse of Ham. Now it's called the curse of Canaan. It was not a curse on pork products. It was a curse on one of Noah's sons. And we were taught, because of that verse, that I remember my Sunday school teacher very sincerely telling us, it's a sin to date a person of another race, because to marry them would be a terrible sin. Well, the impact of an interpretation of a story of Noah getting drunk and his son has resulted in and has been used to justify unjustifiable things. And if white folk want to just say, oh yeah, that's all in the past, that's just a sign of how blind we are to white privilege and the aftermath of racism and how our Bible has been used as a weapon. If you ever get to South Africa, you'll discover that the whole system of apartheid was designed in the 1950s and 1960s in a seminary in South Africa, in Stellenbosch. And it was theologically justified from beginning to end. It became a political system after it was presented as a theological system. And one of the reasons that Dr. King has been so important in American history, and I think will be for centuries to come, is that he used the same Bible that had been used to justify racism and oppression and segregation. He used the same Bible to tell stories that led to reconciliation and peace and a new dream. Amen? This is important. This issue of stories is important because of what it does inside of us. And then when stories form us and frame our encounter of the world, we create very different worlds. It's going on today. You ever spend any time in Israel? Please, if you go to Israel, please don't go on a religious tour where you see the holy sites of the Holy Land without seeing the unholy sites in a land filled with a lot of unholy stuff going on. Understand that stories from the Bible are being used today in frightening ways. For example, the story of Samuel and Saul in 1 Samuel 15, where Samuel was commanded to go and attack Amalek, utterly destroy all they have, do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel, and even donkeys. And of course, I grew up hearing these Bible stories, never knowing that this text was used by Catholics in the 30 Years' War to justify killing Protestants, and by Protestants in the 30 Years' War to justify killing Catholics across Europe. how Puritans used this verse to justify slaughtering Native Americans, and how it's still being used today. Wasn't too long ago, I think it was in 2009, that Benjamin Netanyahu was asked about Iran, and his response was, "Think Amalek." Does that send a chill up your spine? Stories frame us. There's been a lot of controversy about an evangelical organization that my children benefited from. Some of you might be involved with it. Child Evangelism Fellowship uses that story of Saul and Samuel and killing the Amalekites to tell children how they ought to obey God. And when some atheists got a hold of that and heard, they said, "Boy, these people are being formed to kill us." And they got a little nervous, and I can see why. So stories have a powerful, powerful effect. And I think we have some serious work to do in this regard, brothers and sisters. You know, some theological problems are modular. You can take out your eschatology unit and plug in a new one. You can take out your theory of atonement unit and plug in a new one. But some of our theological and spiritual problems are systemic. And you can't just change a unit. Something deeper has to happen. And I think that that is part of our struggle. It's an especially important struggle for white Christians of European descent who've inherited a history that we didn't make happen, but we inherited it. And in some ways we now run the machinery of. We have some work to do on how we look at the biblical text and understand story. And I especially think this is important in regards to the big story that a lot of us assume is the biblical story. Now, it was mentioned before, I was an English major, and I taught college English. And one of the things we used to learn how to do is draw plot diagrams. And one day I was sitting in a coffee shop with a friend, and I tried to draw the plot diagram of the Bible that I had been taught. And I'm going to guess that a whole lot of you, when you see this, you can fill in the names, right? You know, this is the story of the perfect Garden of Eden, the fall into a fallen history, and eventually there'll be salvation to heaven, and if it doesn't go so well, to hell. And I'll just tell you, maybe you weren't raised with this, but I was raised, this was the biblical story. Can I tell you, it's interesting, you'll never find the word "the fall" in the Bible. You know, this story is never told in the Bible, but a lot of us, we've never questioned this. And I know just for me to put this up is probably disturbing to some people because this is our only understanding of the Bible. And I wouldn't even deal with this if I didn't think that those atrocities that have happened in the past have something to do with this story. That this story framed and formed us and empowered us to do some pretty scary things. And the terrible thing is, even worse things could happen in the future if we don't have some serious reconsideration of our story.